I just faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president sold my land while I was deployed. Her excuse? She said that they needed a better owner because I had unpaid assessments and covenant violations. Funny thing is, the only thing repossessed that day was her entire scheme by the National Guard, sheriff, and marshals when they got involved. Let me start from the beginning. Texas taught me this. The meanest weapons wear pearls and carry bylaws. I'm Mike Evans, but everyone calls me Rhino. In the Army, I took hits and kept moving. Back home, I had to do it daily. Sharon Vance, our HOA president, ran Willow Creek like her private kingdom. My office was my grandpa's red barn. Hand-cut boards, sawdust, and old leather in the air. From that desk, I watched the 10 acres he left me. The mesquite pit, the pond, the wide sky. Not property, bloodline. To Sharon, just real estate. I was on a video call, the kind that makes your palms sweat. On the other side of the screen was an investigator from the Texas Attorney General's office, a man named Peterson. He had a serious face and tired eyes, the kind you see on men who've heard too many stories like mine. Sarah, my wife, my rock, my one-woman command center, sat beside me, tracking the call stability. Out here, cell service gets sketchy, especially when a storm brews, and the clouds on the horizon looked angry. Mr. Evans, Peterson said, his voice a low rumble through the laptop speakers. Let's be clear. You're alleging that Ms. Vance and the Willow Creek HOA initiated foreclosure proceedings on your property while you were on active duty. Is that correct? That's correct, sir, I said, keeping my voice even, calm under fire. That was the training. They tacked on thousands in fake fines. Landscaping violations for grass that was too green. Fines for a fence my grandpa built 50 years before the HOA existed. They sent the notices to the house knowing I was deployed. My wife fought it, but they buried her in paperwork. They were trying to steal my home over a manufactured debt of $847. They pushed it to a trustee sale while I was overseas. The gavel fell at noon. Deed recorded to Vance Holdings. Sharon's shell. They sold my land while I was deployed. Sarah put her hand on my arm. Her touch was grounding. She'd been through the ringer while I was gone. She was the one who discovered this wasn't just about us. Sharon was a predator targeting military families across the subdivision, using the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the SCRA, as her personal loophole-finding challenge. She knew the law was meant to protect us, and she twisted it. We have your wife's documentation, Peterson said, shuffling papers on his end. The SCRA violation is significant, but proving criminal intent, Mr. Evans, that's the hard part. We need more than just suspicious fines. We need a smoking gun. I leaned forward. I believe we have one. My grandfather, the original owner of this land, was a smart man. When he sold off the surrounding acreage that became Willow Creek, he held on to the mineral rights, not just for this homestead, for the entire subdivision. Peterson's eyebrows shot up. That was the reaction I was hoping for. Oil, gas, and more importantly, in Texas, water. It was all mine, right under their feet. The HOA's fancy irrigated lawns, their community pool, even the water in their toilets. It was technically my water. Before Peterson could respond, a shadow fell across the barn's open doorway. Then came the sound of splintering wood. The heavy oak door my grandpa had hung flew inward, kicked off its hinges with a sickening crack. It slammed against an old saddle rack, sending it crashing to the floor. Standing there, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was Sharon Vance. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that sucked all the air out of the room. She wore a floral pink cardigan over a white blouse, pearls bright at her throat, completely wrong for a dusty barn, and her blonde hair was pulled into a severe, weaponized bun. Behind her stood two large men in matching gray polo shirts with HOA compliance embroidered on the chest. They looked less like they were there to measure grass height, and more like they were there to break kneecaps. Sharon's eyes, cold and blue as a winter pond, flicked from me to Sarah, then to the laptop screen. A thin, cruel smile played on her lips. Well, Mike. I heard you were back. I see you're already busy spreading lies. Her voice was smooth, cultured, but with an edge like broken glass. She took a step into my barn, my private space, my office. Her men flanked the doorway, arms crossed, blocking our only way out. On the screen, I could see Investigator Peterson's face, frozen in a mask of disbelief. He was watching a crime happen in real time. My training kicked in. Threat assessment. 2 hostiles plus the primary antagonist. No visible weapons, but their size was a weapon. My heart rate didn't spike. It settled into a low, steady drum. Fight or flight is for people with options. I just had a barn to defend. Sarah's hand tightened on my arm. Her breathing was steady. She was a soldier's wife. She knew the drill. "Sharon," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You just kicked in my door. You're trespassing. And I think you just made a big mistake in front of a state official." Sharon's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she glanced at the laptop again. She was smart, I'll give her that. But she was also arrogant. She thought she was untouchable, and she had no idea how many friends I had. She'd kicked in my door during a video call with the Attorney General. She thought it was a power move. For me, it was a gift. The hook was set. Now I just had to reel her in. 2 local officers, called by Sharon, rushed in. I was still in uniform from base. "He assaulted me," she lied. They cuffed me and walked me toward the cruiser while Peterson watched on the laptop, stunned. Sarah played the door cam clip, Sharon kicking first. The cuffs came off. The sergeant muttered an apology and walked me back inside. Sharon smiled like she'd still won. Before I could savor the moment, before Sharon could fully process the tactical blunder she just made on a recorded line with the state, the world went dark and silent. The lights in the barn flickered once, then died. The hum of the air conditioner cut out. The laptop screen showing Investigator Peterson's shocked face went black. My cell phone lying on the desk lost its single bar of service. Dead. Complete isolation. Somebody was running a portable cell jammer. Illegal, but it kills bars fast. Sarah squeezed my hand. A silent signal. Power cut. Comms out. I knew what it meant. This wasn't a random outage from the coming storm. This was deliberate. This was Sharon's next move. She wasn't just arrogant. She was thorough. Her smile returned, wider and more menacing this time. The temporary loss of light made her teeth seem to glow. "It seems," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "that you're having some technical difficulties, Mike. Don't worry. My associates and I are just here to conduct a compliance inspection. It's for the good of the community." She knew she'd cut me off from the outside world. She believed she had me trapped. My grandpa always said, "Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man." He also said that when a bully cuts the lights, it's because they're afraid of what you'll do when you can see clearly. He'd bought this homestead after his own service. A piece of quiet to call his own in the rolling hills outside Austin. He was a surveyor, a man who understood the land, not just what was on it, but what was under it. When the developers came sniffing around in the 80s wanting to build Willow Creek, he sold them the land but kept what he called the real treasure, the mineral rights. It was a footnote in a thick legal document, a bit of old-timer wisdom that the slick developers in their city suits probably laughed at. Oil and gas were a long shot, but the water rights? That was his legacy, his insurance policy. He told me once, "Land is honest, son. People aren't. Always own what they can't see." He'd passed away 2 years ago, right before my last deployment. I inherited the homestead, the 10 acres, the barn, the pond, and that dusty old deed filed away in his roll-top desk. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a piece of paper, a memory of a wise old man. I was more worried about leaving Sarah alone to handle things. Sharon Vance had been a thorn in the community's side for years. She'd gotten onto the HOA board with a campaign of smiles and promises, then consolidated power with a series of bylaw changes and intimidation tactics that would make a dictator blush. She stacked the board with her cronies. Good people, decent neighbors, were fined into submission or sold their homes just to get away from her. Then she set her sights on my place. It was the original parcel, the heart of Willow Creek, and it wasn't under her thumb. My grandpa never joined the HOA. He didn't have to. But when I inherited it, Sharon saw her chance. While I was in a desert halfway around the world, the violation notices started coming. Sarah called me, frantic. Fines for weeds that didn't exist. A citation for the color of the barn door, a color it had been for 60 years. A demand to remove the mesquite pit because it wasn't a pre-approved structure. Sarah fought every single one. She went to the board meetings, her binder of evidence in hand, and they smiled condescendingly and voted against her. They buried her in legal threats. They were bleeding us dry, dollar by dollar, fine by fine. The $800 lien was the final straw, the key they needed to start foreclosure proceedings. That's when Sarah called Jack. The lawyers in uniform took one look and saw the SCRA violation clear as day. A service member on active duty cannot have their property foreclosed on like this. It's the law. But Sharon was clever. She was walking a fine line, using a web of civil actions to make it look legitimate, counting on us to give up, to not have the resources or the will to fight from a war zone. She underestimated Sarah, and she underestimated me. Back in the dark barn, the only light came from the open door, framing Sharon and her two bookends. My eyes had adjusted. I could see every detail. The smug certainty on her face. The bored, brutal look on her guards' faces. My grandpa's legacy was at stake. My home. My wife's safety. The core question echoed in my mind. How far will a man go to defend his own? I was about to find out. I stood up slowly. Sharon, I said, my voice low. You cut the power. You're blocking my road. You've trespassed. You've assaulted me. And you did it all in front of a witness from the AG's office. You think you've cornered me. I took a step toward her. Her goons tensed. You haven't cornered me. I continued, my voice like gravel. You've just declared war, and you have no idea who you're fighting. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah slip away from the desk and move towards the back of the barn, her movement silent and practiced. The phone tree was down, the internet was out. Phase 1 of Sharon's plan was complete, but Phase 2 of ours was just beginning. Outside, the first rumble of thunder echoed across the prairie. The storm was coming, the real one. The quiet hum I heard wasn't in my head. It was real. It was coming from the back of the barn. Sarah had just fired up the generator. The real fight was about to start, and Sharon had just given us everything we needed to win it. The generator sputtered to life with a reassuring roar, a sound that cut through the manufactured silence Sharon had tried to impose. A string of bare work bulbs strung along the barn's rafters flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. Sharon and her two thugs flinched at the sudden light. They'd expected me to be a victim in the dark. They didn't know this barn had its own power, its own pulse. It was built for self-sufficiency. Just like my grandpa, just like me. Impressive, Sharon sneered, recovering quickly. A generator. But your phones still don't work, do they? No one is coming to help you. She was right about the phones. A dead zone. But she was wrong about the help. My help wasn't coming. It was already here. Sarah emerged from the back holding a ruggedized tablet. The screen glowed, a beacon in the dusty air. Scout is airborne, she said, her voice calm and clear. Scout was our eye in the sky, a high-end quadcopter drone with a thermal camera. My welcome home gift to myself. Sharon's face tightened. She hadn't counted on a drone. I turned my attention back to her. This is your last chance, Sharon. Walk away. Take your muscle with you and get off my property. One of her goons, the bigger of the two, chuckled. Or what? You going to call the cops? Oh, wait. He tapped his ear. No signal. I ignored him and looked directly at Sharon. This isn't a threat. It's a piece of friendly advice. You've crossed a line you can't uncross. Her response was to gesture to her men. Check the property for compliance violations. Be thorough. It was a pretext, a flimsy excuse to let her thugs run rampant, to intimidate, to search for something they could use against me. As they started to move past me, I heard a loud horn blare from down the street. Then another. I glanced towards the open barn door. A large white pickup truck, the kind contractors use, was pulling sideways across our gravel road, blocking the entrance. Another one was doing the same thing at the other end of the block. Homeowners Association logos were slapped on their doors. Hired guards, the same kind Sharon used for her patrols, were getting out, setting up a perimeter. They were blockading the entire street. Willow Creek's roads are private HOA property. She thought that gave her the right to seal them. She wasn't just isolating me. She was isolating the whole neighborhood. She was cutting us off. My neighbor Colonel Davis's house was within the blockade. Davis was a retired colonel, a man who believed in rules and regulations, but not in tyranny. He'd been feeding me information for weeks about Sharon's shady dealings. He kept receipts, literally every questionable invoice, every suspicious contract the HOA signed. He was on our side. Now he was trapped, too. A full-blown siege, I murmured to Sarah. She's gone completely off the rails. Sarah didn't look up from her tablet. She's desperate. The AG call spooked her. She's trying to contain the damage. She tapped the screen. Scout has eyes on the whole street. They're turning people away at the blockade. The genius of Sarah was her foresight. She had established a neighborhood phone tree weeks ago, a low-tech chain of communication for exactly this kind of scenario. But with the cell network down, it was useless. Or so Sharon thought. Is Walter on the net? I asked quietly. Sarah nodded, patching him in now. Neighbor Walter was our secret weapon, a ham radio enthusiast who looked like Santa Claus and sounded like a gravelly-voiced disc jockey. He was our backup comms. Sarah kept the video on a closed Wi-Fi link. Walter relayed play-by-play over ham radio, so neighbors could follow. It was old-school tech meeting new-school tech. As Sharon's goons started poking around my workshop, opening cabinets and tossing tools aside, I knew their real target wouldn't be in the barn. They were creating a distraction. They're going for your truck, I said to Sarah. It was the logical next step. Discredit us. Make us look like the criminals. Sarah's truck was parked right outside the barn. An easy target. Scout is watching, she replied, her fingers flying across the screen. She angled the tablet so I could see. The thermal image showed two figures detaching from the main group of guards at the blockade and slinking along the fence line, staying in the shadows. They were heading for the driveway. I needed to keep Sharon and her two clowns occupied here in the barn. I leaned against my workbench, crossing my arms. You know, Sharon, my grandpa always said you can judge a person's character by the company they keep. I looked pointedly at the two oversized goons who were now clumsily trying to look intimidating while rifling through a box of old spark plugs. One of them, the one who'd laughed earlier, held up a rusty wrench. This isn't up to code, he grunted. I almost laughed. That wrench is older than your parents, son. Show some respect. Sharon's patience was wearing thin. The generator hummed. The lights stayed on. The drone was in the air. And I wasn't panicking. This wasn't going according to her script. Find something, she hissed at her men. On Sarah's tablet, the two figures reached her truck. One stood lookout while the other jimmied the lock on the passenger side door. It popped open with a soft click, barely audible over the rising wind of the storm. They're in, Sarah whispered. The figure leaned inside, pulling a small, dark package from his jacket. He was reaching under the passenger seat. He was planting something. Contraband, drugs, a weapon. It didn't matter what it was. It was the kind of thing that would turn a civil dispute into a felony investigation. It would discredit me, discredit Sarah, and make the AG's case against her evaporate. The whole neighborhood, listening in on their radios, was about to watch Sharon's hired help commit a felony live on the air. But watching wasn't enough. We had to stop them. We had to do it without tipping our hand that we knew exactly what they were doing. I caught Sarah's eye. She gave me a subtle nod. She had an idea. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. The question wasn't if we could catch them. It was how to make it hurt the most when we did. All right, Walter, you're live. Sarah's voice was a low whisper, but the microphone on her headset would carry it clear as a bell across the airwaves. A crackle of static, then Walter's voice boomed, full of goofy gravitas. Neighbor Walter is on the air, and we are looking at some top-tier shenanigans, folks. Scout cam is crystal clear. We got two fellas, let's call them Shifty and Grifty, breaking into Sarah's pickup. That is a big no-no in the Lone Star State, listeners. I had to suppress a smile. Walter was a character, but he was our character. His running commentary was being broadcast to at least a dozen homes on our blockaded street. He was turning Sharon's siege into a dinner theater performance for the whole neighborhood. Back in the barn, Sharon was getting agitated. Her two stooges, let's call them Dumb and Dumber, were still pretending to conduct a compliance inspection. One of them was looking at a stack of firewood. This stack is irregular, he declared. I couldn't help myself. It's firewood, genius. It's supposed to be irregular. You want it to be uniform, go buy a Duraflame log. Sharon shot me a look that could curdle milk. Shut up, Mike. On the tablet, I watched the thermal signature of the man I now thought of as Grifty. He had the package under Sarah's seat. He was just pulling his hand back out. It was time. Now, Sarah, I said, loud enough for Sharon and her crew to hear. Honey, did you remember to lock your truck? With all this commotion, I'd hate for someone to mess with it. It was the perfect bait. Simple, domestic, and utterly disarming. Sarah played her part perfectly. Her eyes went wide with faux panic. Oh my gosh, I don't think I did. My purse is in there. She made a move for the door. One of Sharon's goons stepped in her way. Nobody's going anywhere, he growled. This is an official inspection. Sharon watched the exchange, a smug little smirk on her face. She thought we were falling right into her trap. She believed her men outside were undiscovered. She had no idea they were the stars of Willow Creek's new favorite reality show. Sarah looked at me, her face a mask of worry. Then she looked down at the tablet in her hand. Well, if I can't go out there. Her thumb swiped across the screen, then tapped an icon labeled with a simple lightning bolt. On the live feed from Scout, I saw the lights on Sarah's truck flash once, then the horn let out two short, sharp honks. It was the remote lock and panic button feature, standard on most vehicles, but we'd added a little custom modification. Grifty, the man planting the evidence, jumped back from the truck as if he'd been zapped with a cattle prod. He looked around wildly. Shifty, his lookout, grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back into the shadows. They thought they had just triggered the car alarm. They were wrong. What was that? Sharon snapped, her head whipping toward the sound. Just my wife locking her truck, I said casually. A little late, I guess. On the drone feed, something else was happening. A thin wisp of smoke was curling out from the passenger side door of the truck. Then another, then a lot more. It wasn't black smoke. It was thick, white, and billowing. And the crowd goes wild. Walter's voice crackled over the comms in my earpiece. It appears our contestant Grifty has won himself a little prize. That ain't smoke, neighbors. That's military-grade pepper fog. Looks like Sarah's truck has an anti-theft system they don't sell at the dealership. We'd logged the OC system and posted a warning decal months ago. Sarah had rigged a small, remotely triggered canister under the dash. It was designed for crowd control, harmless but incredibly effective at making a small enclosed space completely uninhabitable. The cab of her truck was now a swirling vortex of concentrated pepper spray. Grifty and Shifty stumbled back, coughing and sputtering, clawing at their eyes. They were blinded, choking, and covered in evidence. The package they had tried to plant was still on the floor of the truck, now marinating in a cloud of pure misery. Sharon knew immediately what had happened. The color drained from her face. Her plan to frame us had literally gone up in smoke right in front of her. Her goons in the barn looked confused, glancing from me to their boss. They weren't smart enough to grasp the full implication, but they could smell failure, and it smelled a lot like pepper spray. My men, Sharon stammered. They were just patrolling. Patrolling the inside of my wife's truck? I asked, letting the sarcasm drip. That's a new one. Don't worry, Sharon. We have the whole thing on camera, high definition, and thermal. The AG's office is going to love the instant replay. I nodded towards the tablet in Sarah's hand. We'll send them a copy as soon as you and your roadblocks are gone. The standoff was broken. The power had shifted decisively. Sharon stood there, trapped between her failed plan and her two useless enforcers. The sound of her men retching and wheezing outside was a symphony of incompetence. The thunder outside was getting louder, closer. The wind rattled the tin roof of the barn. The sky was turning a bruised, ugly shade of purple. The storm was about to break, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. Sharon looked at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of emotion. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. She had tried to frame us, and we had turned it into a public spectacle. The blockade was still up. The power was still out. But she had lost control of the narrative. And a control freak like Sharon couldn't stand that. She spun on her heel, her face a thundercloud. This isn't over, Mike, she spat, marching out of the barn, her goons scrambling to follow her like scolded puppies. I knew she was right. This wasn't over. This was just the end of a chapter. Her next move wouldn't be about subtlety or framing. It would be about brute force. The storm was coming, and Sharon Vance was about to become even more dangerous. The moment Sharon stormed out, the atmosphere in the barn shifted. The immediate threat was gone, but a heavier, more ominous feeling settled in. It was the feeling you get right before a hurricane makes landfall. The wind howled outside, and the first heavy drops of rain began to hammer against the metal roof like drum fire. This wasn't just a storm. It was a full-blown Texas gully washer, the kind that turns dusty creek beds into raging torrents in minutes. Sarah didn't waste a second. Colonel Davis is on the line, she said, pointing to her headset. He says the water's rising fast at the low-water crossing. The low-water crossing was the only way in or out of the back half of our neighborhood. A concrete slab laid over a creek that was usually bone dry. With the main road blockaded by Sharon's goons, it was the only potential escape route for anyone on our street, and it was about to disappear under a flash flood. Walter, what's Scout see? I asked, moving to stand behind Sarah, peering at the tablet. Walter's voice came back, the goofy tone replaced by a note of genuine concern. Whoa, Nellie. Colonel Davis ain't kidding. That creek looks angry. It's already over the road. And hold on, I got a car down there. The drone's camera zoomed in, cutting through the rain. A small sedan was stalled right in the middle of the crossing, brown water swirling up past its hubcaps. The water was rising with terrifying speed. Can you see who it is? Sarah asked. Walter was silent for a moment. License plate is HOA 2. That's the treasurer's car. That's Andrew. Andrew Kim, the HOA treasurer, a quiet, nervous man who always seemed terrified of his own shadow, and especially of Sharon. He was one of her cronies, but not one of the true believers. He was a follower, a man motivated by fear. And right now, he was trapped. The core of my being, the soldier part, took over. It didn't matter who was in that car. A person was in danger. You don't leave someone behind, ever. I'm going, I said, already grabbing my heavy-duty rain gear and a coil of rope from a hook on the wall. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with worry, but she didn't argue. She knew me. She knew this was something I had to do. Be careful, Rhino, she said, her voice tight. Scout will be your eye in the sky. Walter, I said into my own comms unit. Talk to me. Keep me updated on the water level. You got it, Rhino, he replied. Just don't do anything I wouldn't do. Which gives you a lot of leeway, come to think of it. A flash of his usual humor, even now. It helped. I burst out of the barn and into the deluge. The wind nearly tore the door from my hand. Rain flew sideways, stinging my face. I could hear the roar of the creek from 100 yards away. My big Ford F-250 was my go-to for situations like this. It had the clearance and the power. As I climbed in, I saw Sharon standing on her porch down the street, a silhouette against the lighted window of her perfect house. She was watching. She saw the car. She saw me getting ready. And she did nothing. She just stood there, letting one of her own people face the flood alone. It told me everything I needed to know about her. I gunned the engine and tore across my own lawn, bypassing the useless road and heading straight for the back of my property, which bordered the creek. The truck's big tires churned through the mud. I could see the crossing now. The water was a churning brown monster filled with debris. Andrew's little sedan was being rocked by the current, the water already halfway up its doors. He's still inside, Rhino. Walter's voice crackled in my ear. He's trying to get out, but the door won't open. Water pressure. I knew I couldn't drive into that. Even my truck would get swept away. I parked on the high bank, jumped out, and secured one end of the rope to my trailer hitch. Sarah, can you get Scout right over him? I need to see his face, I yelled into the mic. On it, she replied instantly. The drone was a ghost in the storm, its rotors fighting the wind. On my phone, which was linked to the feed, I saw Andrew's terrified face pressed against the driver's side window. He was panicking. I tied a loop in the other end of the rope, making a makeshift harness. I had to get to him. There was no other choice. I waded into the flood. The cold, powerful current immediately grabbed at my legs, trying to pull me under. Each step was a battle. The water was waist deep, then chest deep. It was a stupid risk, a calculated one. Rhino, he's trying to climb out the window, Walter yelled. I saw it happen. Andrew, in his desperation, managed to squeeze through the open window of his car. The moment he was out, the current caught him. He was swept off the car and went under. A second later, he bobbed back up, flailing, 50 feet downstream from me and moving fast. He was going to drown. There was no time to think. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and launched forward, letting the current take me, aiming for a point ahead of him. It was a controlled fall, a desperate gamble. The water was a chaotic mess of branches and mud. I surfaced, gasping, and saw him just a few feet away. I lunged, my fingers closing around the collar of his soaked polo shirt. I had him. Now for the hard part. I was holding on to a panicking, full-grown man with one arm, fighting a flash flood with the other. The rope was my only hope. I pulled on it hand over hand, the coarse fiber burning my palms. Every inch was a victory. My boots found no purchase on the slick creek bed. I was just pulling against the full force of the flood. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned. For a second, I thought we were lost. Then I felt a change. The pulling got easier. I looked up towards the bank. Through the sheeting rain, I saw a figure. Colonel Davis. He'd come out of his house and was at the back of my truck, hauling on the rope with me. Together, we dragged ourselves and a sputtering, terrified Andrew Kim onto the muddy bank. We lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the three of us, while the storm raged around us. I had gone out to save a man who was part of the machine trying to crush me. I hadn't hesitated. And as Andrew coughed up creek water and looked at me, not with gratitude, but with a raw, soul-shaking terror that had nothing to do with the flood, I realized something. He wasn't afraid of the storm. He was afraid of Sharon. He was afraid of what she would do to him. Now, as he lay there shivering, he reached inside his drenched jacket. His hand was shaking uncontrollably. He wasn't reaching for a phone or a wallet. He was pulling out a small, waterproof zip drive. He pushed it into my hand, his eyes pleading. "Take it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's everything. The real ledger. Please." In the middle of the storm, in the middle of the fight for my home, the game had just completely changed. The one thing we needed most had just been delivered by the flood. I stared at the zip drive in my hand. It was small and black, and it felt heavier than a block of lead. Andrew Kim, the man I just pulled from a flash flood, was looking at me with the eyes of a man who had just betrayed a monster and was praying he'd picked the winning side. "The real ledger?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the wind. He nodded, shivering violently from cold and fear. "She keeps 2 sets of books. One for the auditors, a clean one. The other one. That's where everything is. The missing reserve funds, the kickbacks from contractors, the illegal payments to the compliance officers." He coughed, a racking sound. "She was going to get rid of me. The storm, it was the perfect excuse. She told me to go check the drainage culvert at the crossing. She knew it would flood. Sharon hadn't just stood by and watched him nearly drown. She had sent him there to die. That was a line even I hadn't expected her to cross. This wasn't about a house anymore. This was attempted murder. Colonel Davis, ever the practical one, helped Andrew to his feet. "Let's get him to my house. He needs to get warm and dry." He looked at me, his gaze hard. "And you need to get that drive to Sarah? Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted back to the barn, the little piece of plastic clutched in my fist. When I burst through the door, soaked and muddy, Sarah was already moving toward me with a dry towel. She took one look at my face, then at the drive in my hand, and she knew. "Is that?" "It is," I said, handing it to her. "The treasurer defected. It's the real ledger." Her eyes lit up. This was the smoking gun investigator Peterson had talked about. This was the proof of criminal intent. She plugged the drive into her laptop. A moment later, a spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a work of art, if you appreciate meticulous criminal bookkeeping. Columns for dates, illegal fines, cash withdrawals labeled consulting fees, and a separate tab named Homestead Project. My blood ran cold. It was a detailed budget for forcing me out. Line items for extra legal fees, private investigators to dig up dirt on me and Sarah, and payments to the guards blockading our street. She had been planning this for months. It was a hostile takeover documented in cold, hard numbers. "We've got her," Sarah breathed, scrolling through the rows. "This is it. Forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy." It was time to build our case file. For the next few hours, the barn became a war room. The storm raged outside, but inside, we were laser-focused. Sarah, the digital wizard, worked the ledger, cross-referencing it with the evidence we already had. I took on the role of analyst, piecing the story together. We pulled up the doorbell camera footage from Colonel Davis's house. It showed Sharon's compliance officers doing a late-night walkthrough of my property line weeks ago, a clear case of trespassing. We had audio files Sarah had secretly recorded at an HOA meeting where Sharon blatantly lied about the budget. Then came the big one. We compared the date on the ledger for the Homestead Project kickoff with the official HOA filings Davis had gotten from the county clerk. We found it. A forged document filed just one day after my grandpa's funeral. It was a lien claiming the estate owed money for noncompliance. A lien placed against a dead man, timed perfectly so the notices would get lost in the legal chaos of settling his affairs. It was predatory, ghoulish, and utterly illegal. Next, we matched the ledger's payment records to the SCRA violation. There it was in black and white. A bonus paid to her lawyer, specifically for expedited action on military-owned property. She wasn't just ignoring the law. She was paying people to break it for her. It was a mountain of evidence, an avalanche waiting to fall on her. every piece connected to the next, painting a picture of a woman so consumed by greed and power that she had become a one-woman crime wave. The missing reserve funds that neighbors had been complaining about for years, drained, siphoned into a shell corporation with a name that was almost comical, Willow Creek Beautification LLC. We had everything. The motive, the means, the opportunity, and now the confession from her own treasurer and the playbook he delivered. We had it all documented, organized, and saved in a single encrypted file. But as I looked at the screen, at the sum of all her crimes, a nagging feeling hit me. It was good. It was damning. But it wasn't personal enough. It proved she was a thief. I wanted to prove she was a fool. I wanted to use her own arrogance against her. There's something else, I said, walking over to my grandpa's old roll-top desk. It had survived the flood that took out his first house, and it held all his important papers. I rolled up the top. The smell of old paper and wood polish filled the air. The ledger is her weapon. The fines are her weapon. I want to use his. I rummaged in the back of a deep drawer, past old tax returns and property surveys. My fingers closed around a long, cylindrical cardboard tube sealed with wax. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. "What's that?" Sarah asked. "It's the original deed," I said, carefully breaking the old wax seal. "The one from when he sold the land to the developers. The one with the footnote." I unrolled the brittle parchment. It was covered in my grandpa's neat architectural script and the florid signatures of the developers. And there it was at the bottom of the last page, a handwritten addendum. It was the clause reserving all mineral, oil, and water rights for the 10-acre homestead parcel. But there was more. I'd read it a dozen times, but never with the new subdivision plat map in front of me. Sarah pulled up the map on her screen. We looked at the old deed, then at the new map, back and forth. And then we saw it. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the most beautiful, poetic piece of justice I could have ever imagined. The final nail was not in her ledger. It was in my grandpa's legacy. "Holy cow," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen, comparing the old deed to the modern plat map. "Rhino, are you seeing this?" I was seeing it, and it was better than I ever could have hoped. The original survey markers detailed in my grandpa's deed were crystal clear. When the developers had laid out the Willow Creek subdivision, they'd made a mistake, a tiny, insignificant-looking error on the map, probably made by some junior surveyor in a hurry. They had miscalculated the exact boundary of my grandpa's 10-acre homestead by about 50 feet along the entire eastern edge. It was a sliver of land. But on that sliver, on that 50-foot strip of land that they thought was community property, they had built two things. Two very important things. The big, fancy resort-style swimming pool and the million-dollar stone gatehouse and security office that served as the HOA's headquarters. Sharon Vance's throne room. "They're on my land," I said, a slow, grim satisfaction washing over me. "The pool, the gatehouse. It's all on my property." It wasn't just the subsurface rights anymore, the water under their feet. It was the surface, too. The physical ground they stood on. They had built their most expensive, most prominent community assets on land they never actually owned. My grandpa's foresight was one thing. The developer's sloppy work was a gift from the universe. I could hear his voice in my head, a low chuckle. "Always check the survey line, son. Always." I looked at Sarah, the gears turning in my head. "You can't sell what you don't own," I said, the words tasting like victory. "And you can't build on it, either." This changed the entire game. The evidence of her financial crimes would put her in jail. This would dismantle her empire. The HOA didn't own its own headquarters. It didn't own its prize amenity. They were, legally speaking, tenants. My tenants. And they were about to be evicted. "We need to get this to Peterson," Sarah said, her fingers already flying, attaching the scanned deed and the annotated plat map to the growing case file. "And to Jessica." Jessica Finch was a reporter for a major Austin news outlet, a tenacious journalist who had been sniffing around Sharon's HOA for a story on homeowner abuse. We'd been in touch with her, feeding her bits and pieces. This was the bombshell she'd been waiting for. Sarah finished compiling the file. It had a name, Operation Homestead. It contained the ledger, the video of the goons planting evidence, the audio of Sharon's threats, the forged documents, the proof of the SCRA violation, and now the land deed. It was a masterpiece of righteous indignation. She hit send, firing off the encrypted file to 3 people simultaneously. Investigator Peterson at the AG's office, my contact at the JAG Corps, and Jessica Finch. The 3 pillars: law, military, and media. The moment she sent it, a sense of calm descended on the barn. The storm outside was starting to break, the relentless drumming of rain easing to a steady patter. We had done it. We had gathered the intel, built the case, and fired the shot. Now we had to wait for the impact. There was nothing more to do but hold our ground. What now? Sarah asked, leaning back in her chair, the exhaustion of the last few days finally showing on her face. Now we wait for the cavalry, I said. The generator hummed, a steady heartbeat in the quiet barn. The blockade was still in place, but it felt less like a cage and more like a protective wall. Sharon's goons were still out there, but they were no longer a threat. They were just sitting ducks. A message popped up on Sarah's screen. It was from Peterson at the AG's office. The connection was spotty, text only, likely bouncing off a satellite somewhere. The message was brief. Received. Do not engage. Do not leave your property. Help is on the way. Sit tight. The governor declared a storm emergency. The Texas National Guard deployed on state duty to support the AG. I called our guard liaison. Their mission was simple: secure HOA roads and facilities so the court's receiver could take possession. They worked under the sheriff. Traffic, perimeter, flood support. No arrests. I could do that. That was half my military career. Hurry up and wait. We spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. Sarah monitored the drone feed. Sharon's goons were restless. They paced back and forth at the blockade. Sharon herself was a ghost. She hadn't been seen since the treasurer's car was pulled from the creek. She was holed up in her house, probably trying to figure out what had gone wrong. She knew she was in trouble. The failed framing attempt, her treasurer disappearing. She had to know something was coming. Through the ham radio network, Walter kept the neighborhood informed. He told them about Andrew Kim's rescue, about the evidence, about the deed. He didn't give details, just enough to let them know that the tide had turned. You could feel the shift in the community. Porch lights started turning on, one by one, a string of silent support along the blockaded street. They had been afraid for so long. Now they had hope. The waiting was the hardest part. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Every sound made me jump. Was that a car engine? Was it Sharon making a final, desperate move? Or was it the help Peterson had promised? As the first gray light of dawn started to creep over the horizon, painting the wet landscape in shades of silver and gray, we heard it. A low rumble. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of engines. A lot of them. They were coming from the main highway, heading our way. I stood at the open barn door, Sarah beside me, and we watched. This was it. The end of the siege, the beginning of the reckoning. Sharon thought she had us trapped in here with her. She was about to find out she was the one who was trapped. The dawn convoy was a beautiful sight. It wasn't the clumsy pickups Sharon had hired. This was a professional operation. A line of black SUVs and marked sheriff's department vehicles rolled down the main road, their lights off, moving with a quiet, deadly purpose. They didn't slow down for Sharon's makeshift blockade. The first SUV, a heavy-duty model with a reinforced push bar, simply nudged the contractor's pickup aside, as if it were a toy. The truck scraped along the asphalt with a tortured screech of metal, clearing the path. The message was clear: the games were over. I watched from the barn door as the convoy split. Half the vehicles peeled off and surrounded Sharon's perfectly manicured house. The other half continued down the street, heading for the HOA gatehouse. My gatehouse. U.S. Marshals, their vests clearly marked, poured out of the SUVs, moving with the fluid efficiency of trained professionals. They formed a perimeter around Sharon's home. They were there on a federal arrest warrant for wire and mail fraud. Simultaneously, a team of sheriff's deputies and investigators from the Attorney General's office, led by a grim-faced investigator Peterson, approached the gatehouse. The 2 guards Sharon had posted there looked panicked. They'd been hired to bully residents, not to face down federal agents. They dropped their clipboards and put their hands up before anyone even said a word. It was almost comical. Peterson presented a warrant to the ranking deputy, who used a battering ram to open the HOA office door with a single, authoritative thud. A deputy served an emergency state court order vacating the sham sale. The county clerk recorded the judge's order, and canceled the transfer on the spot. Title snapped back to my family. Our neighbors were starting to come out onto their porches, drawn by the noise. They stood there in their bathrobes, coffee cups in hand, watching the liberation of their neighborhood. Colonel Davis gave me a crisp nod from his front lawn. Walter's voice came over the comms, breathless with excitement. It's the cavalry, folks, and they have brought the big guns. The Willow Creek HOA is officially under new management. Sarah and I stayed in the barn, watching it all unfold on the drone feed. We had done our part. This was law enforcement's show now. We watched as Peterson's team began carrying out boxes of files and computer towers from the HOA office. Evidence. At Sharon's house, the marshals were positioned at every door and window. A man with a megaphone stepped forward. Sharon Vance. This is the United States Marshals Service. We have a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands in the air. For a long moment, there was nothing. The only sound was the idling of the engines and the nervous chatter of the neighbors. Then, the garage door of Sharon's house began to grind open, but she wasn't coming out to surrender. An expensive black luxury SUV roared out of the garage, its tires squealing on the wet pavement. Sharon was at the wheel. She was making a run for it. It was a desperate, foolish move. She gunned the engine, driving across her own prize-winning lawn. Tearing up the sod, she'd probably find other people for damaging. She was heading for the street, trying to find a gap in the wall of official vehicles. It was a short chase. It lasted about 50 yards. A heavy sheriff's department pickup simply moved forward, blocking her path. Sharon swerved, trying to go around it, and drove right into the deep ditch that ran alongside the road. The SUV, with all its off-road capabilities, got stuck instantly, its front end buried in the mud, its back wheels spinning uselessly in the air. The marshals swarmed the vehicle. They pulled a sputtering, furious Sharon from the driver's seat. She was still in the floral pink cardigan from the day before, pearls crooked and splashed with mud. Her perfect hair had come undone. She looked wild, cornered, and defeated. They cuffed her right there in the middle of her ruined lawn. As they walked her towards a waiting police car, she saw me. I had stepped out of the barn and was standing at the edge of my property, watching. Our eyes met across the distance. Her face, which had been a mask of fury, contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, letting her see me, letting her see the man whose home she tried to steal. The man who was still standing after she had thrown everything she had at him. As the deputies led her past the crowd of neighbors, a quiet cheer went up. It wasn't loud or vengeful. It was a cheer of relief. The reign of terror was over. I told her, "You sold my land while I was deployed, so I had the military repossess your whole subdivision, by the book." Investigator Peterson walked over to me, leaving the controlled chaos of the raid behind. He looked tired but satisfied. "Mr. Evans," he said, extending a hand. "Mike," I corrected him, shaking it. "Thank you for coming, Peterson." "We should be thanking you," he replied. "That evidence package was the tightest case I've seen in 20 years. You did our job for us." He gestured with his head toward Sharon, who was being put in the back of a squad car. She waved her right to remain silent. She's already blaming her treasurer, her lawyer, the developers, everyone but herself. "Sounds about right," I said. Peterson nodded toward my barn. "And that little tidbit about the mineral rights in the deed? That was a masterpiece. The county is already filing an injunction to lock down all HOA assets pending a full investigation. Under the receivership, the guard and sheriff took control of every HOA asset across the subdivision: roads, gatehouse, pool, and office. Homes stayed with owners, which legally means you now control their headquarters." He almost smiled. "I don't think anyone in Texas history has ever foreclosed on their own HOA." The sun was fully up now, burning away the last of the storm clouds. The air felt clean, washed new. The fight was over. The bully was in cuffs, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. The weeks that followed the dawn raid were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and community meetings. Sharon Vance's empire crumbled faster than a sandcastle in the tide. The story Jessica Finch published went viral, a cautionary tale of HOA overreach that was picked up by national news outlets. The words, "You can't sell what you don't own," became a rallying cry for homeowners everywhere. Sharon, faced with the mountain of evidence from Operation Homestead, took a plea deal that would put her behind bars for a long, long time. Her cronies on the board all resigned in disgrace. The court appointed a receiver to manage the HOA's affairs, and their first act was to declare all of Sharon's fines and liens null and void. It was a total, unconditional victory. But victory on paper and healing a community are two different things. The damage Sharon had done ran deep. Neighbors had been pitted against each other. Trust had been shattered. The neighborhood felt broken. The first step was taking back control. The court ordered a special election to form a new HOA board. Colonel Davis, despite his initial reluctance, was nominated for president. I was asked to serve as vice president. The other positions were filled by good people, neighbors who had been silenced by Sharon and were now ready to step up. Our first board meeting wasn't in the contested gatehouse. It was held on my lawn, around the mesquite pit. We set up folding chairs, served sweet tea and brisket, and just talked. We listened to people's stories, their frustrations, their hopes for what Willow Creek could be. There was still fear, still anger, but for the first time in years, there was also hope. We drafted new bylaws, stripping away all of Sharon's tyrannical rules. We slashed the budget, cutting the wasteful spending on compliance officers and frivolous projects. We made the HOA accountable to the people it served, not the other way around. The gatehouse and the pool, sitting on my land, became our biggest bargaining chip. We didn't evict the HOA. We drew up a lease agreement. $1 a year for 99 years. A gesture of goodwill. The only condition was that the HOA had to be run with transparency and fairness for the benefit of the whole community. It was a permanent check on any future board's power. My grandpa's legacy was now the community shield. But the barn, my grandpa's barn, that's where the real healing began. It had been our war room, our fortress. Now it was time for it to be something more. We cleaned it out, patched the door Sharon had kicked in, and gave it a fresh coat of paint. We hung flags on the wall. The American flag, the Texas flag, and the flags of all the military branches. We called it Operation Homestead. It started as a simple idea, a place where veterans in the community could come for help. Help navigating VA benefits, help writing a resume, or just help having a cup of coffee with someone who got it. I knew how hard the transition to civilian life could be. I wanted to make it easier for the men and women coming home now. Then the idea grew. Sarah, ever the forward thinker, started a tutoring program for the neighborhood kids in the barn's old loft. Colonel Davis started a workshop on emergency preparedness. Neighbor Walter, our ham radio hero, set up a communications class. The barn became the true heart of the community, a place for building things up, not tearing them down. It was a place for learning, for fellowship, for service. A few months after the raid, I was sitting on the barn porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. The smell of mesquite smoke hung in the air. Sarah was beside me, her hand in mine. Kids were laughing and chasing fireflies near the pond. The sound of a hammer on steel rang out from inside the barn where a young Marine I knew was learning some basic welding from another neighbor. It was a good sound, the sound of life, the sound of a community healing itself. I thought about my grandpa. I thought about the land, the legacy he'd left me. It wasn't just about the dirt or the mineral rights. It was about the principle. A home is more than just a house. It's a place you defend. It's a place you belong. It's a sanctuary. Sharon Vance had tried to take that from me, from all of us. But she failed. She failed because she never understood what she was up against. She thought she was fighting one man. She was wrong. She was fighting a soldier, his loyal wife, a retired colonel, a nosy reporter, a brave treasurer, a whole neighborhood, and the enduring spirit of a wise old man who knew that the most valuable things are the ones you can't see. The fight was over, and we had won. Our home was safe. Our community was ours again. And on that quiet Texas evening, that was more than enough.